Ukraine has moved armour to the left side of the Dnipro River and destroyed one of Russia's newest warships with a missile strike in Crimea, while Moscow has threatened to send Ukrainian prisoners of war to fight on the front line against Ukraine. We're in Kharkiv again, and this is a scene of yet another Russian strike. My name is Jerome Starkey. This is Frontline, your roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine, available online and now as a podcast. We'll start with what's happening in Kherson, where Russian military bloggers have amplified photographs that appear to show an amphibious vehicle transporting an infantry fighting vehicle across the Dnipro River. Now, this is significant because for many weeks now, Ukrainian forces, indeed many months, Ukrainian forces have been skirmishing on the left bank of the Dnipro River, which is largely under Russian control. Ukrainians hold the right bank around Kherson. Russians have held the left bank since they retreated about a year ago. But Ukrainian forces have been pushing over in various operations of various sizes. And now it seems they're moving armour over there, establishing a larger, heavier force. Significant because it will complicate Russian decision-making. Russian generals may be forced to move resources back into Kherson to counter this growing Ukrainian threat, but also it will present Ukraine with a problem because the more forces they have on the left bank of the river in Kherson region, the harder it will be for them to resupply them, because the only bridges across that river for some 200 miles have been destroyed. That's the Antonovsky Bridge in Kherson and the Novokhovka Dam further up that was blown up, sending huge floods downstream. Now, we understand that from Kherson city to about 30 kilometers to the east, there is a range of Ukrainian forces operating between 2 and 4 kilometers beyond the left bank of the river. That is probably the most significant development on the battlefield in Ukraine. Skirmishes, battles, offensives are continuing along the length of the front line, right up from Kupiansk in the northeast, where Russian forces continue to attack, through Bakhmut in the east, where we understand Ukrainian forces have made some small advances, through Donetsk and into Zaporizhia, which was the focus of Ukraine's counteroffensive. Those battles have been bloody and costly, but there is not a lot of movement at the moment on the front lines, making some analysts suggesting that it has reached a sort of bloody stalemate. That doesn't mean that stalemate will continue forever, but at the moment, not an awful lot of movement, which may explain why Ukraine continues its focus on hitting Russian resources deep behind the front line. And that brings us to the cruise missile strike on the Askold corvette, a Karakurt-class corvette, which was in a shipyard in the far east of Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula, in Kerch. This is significant for a number of reasons, not least because it comes on the back of more than 16 Russian naval vessels which have been damaged, destroyed, or sunk since the start of the war. It follows a successful strike against a Kilo-class submarine and a Rapucha-class landing ship, which were both in dry docks in Sebastopol, and a successful strike against Russia's naval headquarters also in Sebastopol. Sebastopol on the western edge of the occupied Crimean Peninsula. Kerch, where the Askold was hit and destroyed, it would seem, or damaged beyond economic repair, is in the far east of the Crimean Peninsula. So that represents new reach for Ukraine with its cruise missiles. We understand this was carried out with the French-made Scalp cruise missiles. That's the French variant of the British Storm Shadow, which has already been used to such effect on the western edge of Crimea. British military intelligence suggesting that this latest attack may well force Russia to retreat, to withdraw its naval forces and its shipbuilding capability away from Crimea, further east, potentially out of range of Ukraine's forces. President Zelensky has already warned that as Russia moves its navy to the east of the Black Sea, that Ukrainian attacks will follow it and they will attack the ships wherever they are. Finally, today we're going to discuss the Russian threat to bring a battalion of Ukrainian prisoners of war to fight in the war against Ukraine. So to fight for Russia against Ukraine. Now, this has been reported in the Russian news, in Ria Novosti, a Russian news service, suggesting that about 70 Ukrainian prisoners of war have been recruited, have sworn an oath of allegiance to Russia, and are now forming part of what is called the Bogdan Khmelnytsky Battalion. It's worth saying that using prisoners of war in this way is sort of categorically and very clearly illegal and against the Geneva Conventions. It's illegal to use prisoners of war as this sort of labour, let alone to use them as fighters. It's also worth pointing out that 70 Ukrainian soldiers brought into the fight is not going to make any material difference to resources on the front line. This is more of a psychological weapon, trying to undermine perhaps Ukraine's confidence in the sense that it may be fighting its own people, the idea that there are turncoats, that people are swapping sides. Russians may hope undermine the resolve of the Ukrainians, but clearly so far that resolve has not showed any sign of breaking, and we don't know what conditions these 70 soldiers were in, and whether indeed they have indeed sworn allegiance, whether indeed this is true, or whether this is just a Russian propaganda claim. Russia has said that it will treat these soldiers as it treats its own soldiers, and we know from what we've seen over the last 21 months that that is not particularly well. As ever, if you have any questions, please do ask them in the comments below and we'll endeavour to answer them next time. Questions from our last episode. The first one's about Iran, and can Iran continue to support Russia if it's also supporting Hamas in its conflict against Israel? Worth pointing out that Iran has significant military resources that it uses both in its near neighbourhood and further afield. Indeed, Iran has been named as one of the most significant threats in the UK in terms of the way its spies are operating, threatening Iranian nationals and those with family in Iran living in the UK. The support it's providing to Hamas in Gaza is very different to the support it's providing Russia, and therefore it's unlikely that those two elements will conflict with each other. It's unlikely that Iran will be overstretched. To Hamas, we understand it's principally cash and logistics, possibly rockets or rocket technology for the missiles that Hamas has been firing into Israel. For Russia, it's principally the Shahed kamikaze one-way attack drones, which have been used as part of Russia's regular bombardments, particularly against Ukraine's energy infrastructure. These drones, not particularly fast flying, but they do have a long range. They can be shot down, but they've been used in significant numbers to overwhelm, in some cases, Ukraine's air defences. Question number 2 was about the plans to get Ukrainian pilots flying F-16s. Where are we with that? Well, Romania has just announced that it's ready to train Ukrainian pilots at the European Fighter Training Centre, which it hosts. The Netherlands, the Dutch Defence Ministry, have said that 5 of its F-16s are on their way to that training centre to be used for that training. And America said last month in October that its training programme for Ukrainian pilots was already underway, but that training would take at least 5 months. So we'll be looking at, spring next year at the earliest when we might expect to see Ukrainian fighters in F-16s operating in Ukraine. Question number 3, how should viewers of this show, indeed readers of newspapers anywhere, readers of news on the internet, identify phony information? It's a really good question. Obviously, it's something that we wrestle with on a daily basis as we try and sift through what is credible and what is not. I mean, the simplest way, I would say, is to go to trusted news sources, because that is our job, is to sift through that information on your behalf. Look at where the information is coming from, look at who is saying what. Are they credible? Are they reliable? Is it transparently sourced? And finally, question number 4, why were the Russian sea mine laying aircraft not detected and destroyed? You may remember last time we talked about reports that a Russian aircraft had dropped suspected mines in the Black Sea in the corridor that Ukraine was using for vessels to take grain in and out of Ukraine through the Black Sea into international waters so that it can export its grain around the world. Well, the first thing is to say, according to the Ukrainian Armed Forces, these planes were, or plane was detected, which is why we know about it. Question number two, why wasn't it destroyed? I can only speculate on that perhaps where it was flying would have been out of range, or Ukraine may not have had the sort of anti-aircraft missiles or defences that would have been needed to shoot down that kind of aircraft within range of where it was detected. Thank you very much for watching or listening if you've joined us on the podcast. We look forward to seeing or speaking to you again. Please join us for our next update soon.